be scared, we will
उसको कहो तो
to
लाइव
find
है
ways
और
and
क्या
means
जो
of
लाइव है मतलब
ensuring that we have enough of it to keep ourselves going. So, they imagine a Silicon Valley of water technology, new methods of getting rainfall, etc., uh, would emerge. And then there is also this wonderful talk of water justice.
सुनो
How and
हेलो
to whom would
अपना
this
मोबाइल से
water
मेरा मोबाइल से कॉल
belong?
लग जाता है तो क्या करोगे
In
अपने
this
मोबाइल से ना
wonderful book,
ये
and our
यूट्यूब पे
post
लाइव जाओ और इसका
also
जो लिंक है ना
discusses
वो शेयर करो अपने ग्रुप
Maya
में
Shlav's The Blue Mountain and Saeed Khashwa's Let It Be Morning. So these are books which pertain to Israel and the area Palestine, where it is quite dry. And then they also talk about water table, etc. So these are scientific facts, but they affect our lives also. It is not that when the water table goes down and things start happening in the villages, we get affected. And then the creative writing or literature or novel or poetry would emerge, would reflect these concerns, these problems. So this is what it is all about. I think I need to curtail my thought a little bit, but nonetheless, I would like to mention a few books you may be familiar with. There is this Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry Time. These tributaries sometimes, and people prostrating themselves, etc. So the lives of the people over there have become extremely disturbed. There are many books which have been written about water in recent times, since we are dealing with history, contemporary history, or 21st century history. All Quiet in Vikas Puri, uh, it's by Sarnath Banerjee. So it talks about dire water shortage in New
बिल्कुल ही
Delhi,
ख़त्म हो गई
and the search
तुम्हारे फ़ोन
begins
से
for the
जॉइंट कैमरा
mythical
तो उसको बुलाओ
Saraswati,
जल्दी उपेंद्र
for
को बुलाओ
drilling, and they imagine that the drilling till the center of the earth is required. How do we revive this river
अच्छी
in
नहीं हो
order
पा रही
to
एंड्रॉइड गेम से करे
survive?
क्या हो नहीं
Then there
रहा
is
क्या करे बताओ दिक्कत ऐसी हो रही
there's
है
another
या
book
धीरे
by
धीरे इम्प्रूव तो हो रही है चलो
Advait Maharam,
चलने दो
A River Called
हाँ
Titaksh.
ठीक है चलने दो
It is about
चलने दो रहने
um,
दो रिकॉर्डिंग हो रही है
besides
ना
a river where modernization results
कोई
in
इशू होगा तो बताना
disaster
ठीक है मेरे
and
वो
customs
कहाँ
and
मेरे
cultures
स्पीकर पे
collapse, death of husband, brides being kidnapped, spoiling of human nature, where people are unwilling to share
मेरे स्पीकर पे
water with each other
ये
or with the less
आप जाओ
fortunate
उसको
ones.
वहाँ
So
खोल के जाओ
imagine a
उसके अंदर
situation
कोई
where there is
मतलब
drought,
फिर याद आ
there is
जाएगा
acute water shortage, people generally give away water to the
हाँ
needy.
हाँ
But this also does not happen. So this has also been made gutter. Then recently, River Stories was published by a man called Aurangzeb Sen. So problems which arise due to the construction of river dam on Narmada, etc. So river being dammed, whatever besides an artificial lake emerges, and then things being understood from the city point of view or from the point of view of the tribals. How do we feel about it? How do they feel about it? And and then also they juxtapose all this with the mythical origins of the river Narmada. So Narmada is not very far. Some of you might have been to Amarkantak and so on and so forth. So then it has also given rise to some political and imaginary writing, Ocean of Chal, Indian Ocean, etc. So history, fiction, and some little known facts have been used. And then he also talks about, this man also talks about the emergence and decline of Bombay. So people see all kinds of things are being said, that what there will be salination plants, this, that, and the other. New techniques will be found, and things will change, and certain places will probably go down. So with these, shall we say, some random remarks concerning history, how these are incidents in our real history. Now, how do we look at them? There is the Marxist view, there are the regular historians, then there is history from below, then there are these the worm's eye view, the worms and insects, the dregs of society, how do they understand things? You may say that well, if there is water scarcity, I will go and buy a bottle of mineral water. But somebody who does not even have 2 rupees in his pocket, what does he do, and how does he understand the situation? What is his reaction to all that? So, with these few stray remarks, I'd like Professor Nayyar to come and take over. Professor Nayyar, please.
May I begin, Vivek? Yeah. I'm apologizing in advance because some of the sounds from the conference room there is echoing, and I didn't pick up everything that the chair of the session had said. So I'm sorry if there is a problem with the audio from my end as well. Vivek, do let me know if I'm audible enough and clear enough. Yeah, thank you so much, Vivek. Yes. Thanks to all of you for staying till the end of the day, for listening to me. Thank you, Vivek, for asking me to come. And as I indicated to him, I need the mic there switched off, please, because thank you so much for that. Yes. My apologies for all these interruptions before the talk itself. But as I indicated to Vivek, I could not be there in person to listen to the paper readers, specifically people like Professor Trivedi and Professor Pahanchpai. But travel was not possible at this particular point in time. As you might have understood from my title and abstract, which I had shared with Vivek before, my interest is in a very specific component of what is now called the blue humanities. Sometimes it's subcategorized as the riverine or the oceanic humanities as well. And this has to do with what we're picking off now as the hydro novel, which has various kinds of thoughts, but I focused on this couple for this particular talk. It's part of a larger project on literature on climate crisis, in which this is a component dealing with water. So I am looking in keeping in mind the terms and mandate of the conference, the way in which we tackle a history of disaster, the decolonizing of disaster studies, all involving questions of water and thematized in the fiction, which we characterize as a hydro novel. There are variants of this, like I said a couple of seconds ago. We have things like the hydrogothic, for example, the hydrographic novel, some of which appear from India. There are desert novels which are also about water in the exact opposite sense, about the lack of water. So there are multiple variants and subgenres of the hydro novel. So the texts I've chosen are from different parts of the world for obvious reasons, to show that as a blue planet, much of the planet consists of water, much of the human body consists of water, and different parts of the world are connected in terms of water, either with regular flooding or regular droughts. So the hydro novel, a broad category, has to do with water, the lack of it, the necessity of it, the sale and capitalization of it, the dearth of it, all kinds of things connected to water. And my novels include particular text by Paulo Coelho's The Water Knife, set in the Mexican-American border area and Arizona. Nambali Circle's Zambian novel, The Old Drift. Nathaniel Rick's novel set in New York. And a couple of others, which I will be talking about. So in novel itself is the old drift. The chorus is provided with the mosquitoes, and they sing, and this provides a theme for what I have to say. The story of a place is the story of its water. The story of water can be about either excess or scarcity. In the novels under consideration in my talk, water is the theme. Categorizable after Sarah Natal as pluvial novels, these are concerned with, I'll quote Natal's definition, heavy rainfall and flooding, but also with the pluvial flows, ubiquitous wetnesses, and the manifold waters that cool, stagnate, drift, and void. However, pluvial novels can also be, I suggest, novels about novels in which there's a crisis around scarce water, drought, for example. I take this extended semantic scope of pluvial from Natal herself, referring to her earlier work, where she has argued that conceptually the time, pluvial time, implies a material condition in relation to time, and thus to geology and history, that we can refer to as pluvial time. The pluvial lies at the center of an accelerating climate change that exacerbates both drought and heavy rain. The fiction in this talk, specifically literature novels, are about water in its multiple forms, but inevitably central in a crisis over and about water. The crisis originating in an exacerbated by colonial history, post-colonial greed and modernist development, human callousness and climate change. In all cases, the novels are interested in not a single cataclysmic event as much as a series of events and processes that lead to the crisis. These are not novels about the end of the world as much as an ending of the world, sometime in the future. Pluvial time here is what Frank Kermode, in one of his late works, will refer to as the imminent apocalypse, where we are dwelling in the end period. This means, quote from Kermode, we think we can begin.
कहाँ से लिंक जनरेट हुआ था? लिंक कहाँ से जनरेट हुआ था? यहाँ से नहीं हुआ, उसमें हुआ लिंक जनरेट। नहीं, यहाँ से नहीं दिख रहा, वहाँ से कुछ नहीं करना।
It's from each side, no? From each side.
वहाँ से इसमें साइड से
We seem to have lost the signal for a while. Kindly bear with us.
हेलो
submission of the absent chair. As a pillar, since the talk is about vitrofiction and you are living on the confluence of Sangam, may I ask you if you are familiar with some poems on Ganga or Yamuna, or some novels about the river Ganga and Yamuna? You see, most of the important places in Lata, they revolve around these places of water. And water is considered to be something very sacred. The child in the womb is there surrounded by water. If that water is not there, then perhaps your life will not be there. It has also been conjectured that if water scarcity continues like this, then maybe the Third World War is fought for water. In India, we are very fortunate to have plenty of water. Oh yes, please.
I seem to be making more apologies than political points today. I'm sorry about that, my connection just snapped. I hope I'm audible now. Vivek? Am I audible? You're audible. Thank you. Will you please mute that mic there? Thank you. So what we are looking at in the three novels that I was talking about is the sense of disaster, but not one specific event, as much as a process through which the end appears. It is what I refer to as the ending of the world, not as much as the end of the world, living in end times. So the novels don't deal with a cataclysm. It deals with the process through which the cataclysm will eventually arrive. Paolo Piccadillo's novel The Water Knife, structured as a climate thriller, is set in the near future where acute droughts brought on by climate change have rendered water the most expensive resource in the area. Water rights have been erased and all water is corporatized, guarded by militia, hired by companies like the Southern Nevada Water Authority. The major agricultural areas such as Imperial Valley have become dust bowls, as one character puts it, due to the corporatization of water and extended drought. There are water wars. Meanwhile, both the corporations and the resistors are looking for the Pima Treaty, executed between the Native American tribes and the white man in a previous era, so that they can legally restore the water rights for Arizona. And that is the part which refers us to the history of the places. In Helen Havila's Oil of Water, a petrofiction text set in contemporary Nigeria, British oil companies at the colonizers of Rome exploit the land and the people. From pastoral ideal, the villages have slipped into chaos and violence. The native populations are divided among those who work for the company and those who believe the foreign presence is ruinous to the nation and the ecosystem. At the end of the novel, the Zambezi has overflowed the dam and the entire region is flooded. Akin to Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide, the Sundarbans' history of colonization, where he again implies that the colonials were an illusion that they could conquer the land. The same applies to what happens in the Zambezi section, that you think you can control nature. In Nathaniel Witt's novel Odds Against Tomorrow, which is set in New York's growth and speculative capital have ruined the city, with fault lines and water bodies built over and after ignoring warning from geologists, environmentalists and scientists. And as a result, the city is unprepared for the hurricane. Eventually, in New York City, most of it drowns. The hydro novels brought together here engage with different sides of colonial legacies and the post-colony. The United States, where the white man's propaganda were built upon the eviction of the Native Americans, and Piccadillo's explicit referencing of this history in The Water Knife. The history of development in the form of financial speculation and rampant urbanisms in odds against tomorrow in the post-colonies of Nigeria and Zambia, where the colonial legacies haunt in the form of British oil companies and dams. The novels exhibit a shared purpose and points of similarity in their critique of these histories and in their location of disaster within the social crisis stemming from these histories of the land. Like numerous post-colonial novels, they engage in the past. These novels speak of the hydro crisis as a cumulative effect of human interventions in terms of industrialization, techno-urbanisms, regulation of resources, specific historical forces and practices, and imperial formations. Due to this interest in the past and the legacy of imperial formations, the novels instantiate a decolonization of disaster studies. Such a decolonization, argues Anthony Carrigan, requires attention to be paid to the historical forces and to the social crises that have shadowed political decolonization, including war, genocide, and systemic poverty that have been catastrophic for large numbers of people, radically transforming natural and built environments in ways that coincide with current forms of ecological imperialism. This is the key aspect that you need to understand, that there are histories of empire, but there are also current forms of ecological imperialism. And here, this effectively means that there's a continuity of how water, land, or any other aspect of our ecosystems have been colonized. And this mapping of continuity between the way the white people, white histories, white processes took over the land, and what we now see happening in our contemporary era is what we have to pay attention to. Carrigan argues that we pay attention to the connections between vulnerability production, imperialist practice, and cultural response. This means attending to the historical vulnerabilities that are produced at the intersection of environment and society, and which cannot be disentangled from systemic power structure. Decolonizing disaster studies calls upon us to examine those post-colonial texts that challenge, reject, or reconfigure key disaster studies concepts such as resilience, risk, adaptation, and vulnerability. Thus, for instance, Elizabeth DeLauric and others call for a new direction for tropical aesthetics that builds upon and complicates historical images of colonial landscapes and anticipates new features. Michael Liblet identifies a petromagical realism and a saccharine irrealism in Caribbean plantation fiction. About the aesthetics of change fiction, Jenny Ganguly argues about that an aesthetics of geo-alterity informs novels about climate change and planetary crisis. Others have identified strains of the pastoral in climate change fiction. My reading in this talk is in alignment with some of these interpretations of eco-disaster texts. I focus here on hydro novel's catastrophic realism. Catastrophic realism is a subset of the post-colonial novel's realist aesthetic. Did we lose connection again? Yes, sorry. All right. Okay. Maybe instead of water crisis, we should speak of the technological crisis. It might make more sense in the context of this proceeding. Okay. The point I wish to make about the realism of the catachronistic novel. The catachronistic novel is the opposite of the anachronistic novel. The novel talks about the past as the source, as the origin of the current crisis. But, and this is the point, it projects the state of chronic crisis as the future. in some cases as the only future we might have. So it's not a question of just saying all these come from our past, but these are part of our historical processes, or there are certain kinds of histories. But this particular aspect of historical origins, historical sources of crisis, get projected onto the past as the only possible future available to us. So that is why we think of these as novels about ending time, not end time. It's a process which continues. Catastrophic realism is a way of imagining, knowing, and anticipating the future of eco-disaster, survivor cultures, and living on in an end period, even as it looks back at the past, especially practices and processes such as colonialism. Catastrophic realism is a materialist aesthetic, focusing on local change, material loss, and ontological disasters affecting human and non-human forms, the living and the non-living. It demonstrates how the material aspects of work systems become enmeshed in financial networks and producing entirely new evaluations of nature, which then break down. The production of vulnerabilities is located in historical processes and functional practices that create a particular and unique hydrosocial cycle. So there are two subcategories within catastrophic realism. One I characterize as grim realism, which I will now focus on. Grim realism will be something like this, and this is a passage from Helen Habila's novel The Old Drift, 2015. Quote: "The gnarled hanging roots that grew out of the water like proboscises, gasping for air. The atmosphere grew heavy with the suspended stench of dead matter. We followed a bend in the river, and in front of us, we saw dead birds draped over tree branches, their outstretched wings black and slick with oil. Dead fish bobbed white bellied between roots." This local topography, or choreography, more accurately, is replicated throughout the region. As the narrator and his companions on the boat move along the river, they meet similar sights in every village. The village has been ruined, the people have abandoned it, there is a foul stench in the air, there's oil slick, and what Habila describes as the same indefinable sadness in the air. Habila implies a flattening of the land and its people through environmental degradation. In all descriptions, Habila focuses on three local material conditions: militancy, the oil industry, and the changing quality of the river waters. The oil company that begins by sending their men to the village to take samples of soil water eventually comes to buy the village lands. So Habila elaborates the nexus between governments and corporate organizations that trigger environmental and social collapse. The humans displaced, the river polluted, life forms dead, all due to a hydrosocial cycle inherited from the colonial era and now become nativized, so to speak. This emphasis on material effects on water and oil enables Habila to make a crucial point, that climate change is anthropogenic, as in it has a human cause, and post-humanistic. Humans with their ruthless hydrosocial cycle produce climate change whose effects expand beyond the human world to include the non-human and the non-living. The collapse is made more tragic through the invocation of a time before, wherein Habila describes a chronotrope. It was once a world of humans and non-humans living together. Now, I admit that there is a fair amount of romanticization that happens when speaking about indigenous people and indigenous tribes and aboriginals, as saying that making sure that they live closer to nature. So, certain valorization, certain romanticization of the quote-unquote native way of life, as though it is some kind of pure form prior to civilization or culture or modernization or whatever it might be. It was once a world of humans and non-humans living together in a specific topos, and the coming of the oil company effects an irreversible material transformation in the topos. The passage captures the social collapse that accompanies an environmental collapse. This social collapse is an imperial formation, a legacy of the British Empire. That's the crucial part. And the point is that the British are no longer colonizers in the traditional sense, but their companies remain imperial. So you have British companies like Shell Petroleum and others that continue to have a very strong foot in the local cultures and who seem to determine oil government policies. So it is on the one hand a legacy of the imperial formation, the legacy that continues in the form of the oil company, which now operates with impunity due to the support offered by the post-colonial state. The ruins of the land and water are attributed in no uncertain terms to this toxic legacy, as several instances show. Habilah's critique is aimed at multiple constituents of the imperial formation: the colonial empire, the post-colonial nation states, the international academia, and the oil corporation. In the process of exploring the imperial formation that constitutes contemporary Nigeria, this categorism also sketches the future, where the contaminated water, of course also the contaminated soil, will contaminate the human bodies for an uncertain length of time. If Habilah's African setting demonstrates the human, non-human cohabitation, the city of London is also similarly drawn in Maggie G's novel, The Flood. The novel opens with this emphasis on the non-human. I quote, "The earthly city," this is a description of London, "the earthly city, down in the plain, designed for humans and pets, their playthings, billions of microbes, snails and worms and birds, nesting, foraging, quivering, flashing on the flowering quinces, calling sharp warnings against the cats, jackdaws, thrushes, pigeons, starlings. On daffodils in the city zoo, you saw how beautiful, urban foxes." Later, G emphasizes that the vermin survive, demonstrating a particular resilience. I quote, "The rats are there, just beneath the floor." So the rats survive. Stephen Baxter's Nathan in Flood. Baxter is a trilogy of novels around water. He speaks about the human resilience, which enables it to survive. Now, in Odds Against Tomorrow, Nathaniel Rich depicts New York City and Seattle's economies of scale that transform the land into a disaster topos. Researching the threat prospects for New York City, one of his characters speaks about it like this. With depleted salt marshes, narrower beaches, eroded soil, and a higher water table, the East River and the Hudson have each risen 8 inches in the past 20 years. You might be aware of the IPCC United Nations stand that an increase of temperature of 1.5 degrees centigrade is enough to cause flooding. 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature means the glaciers will melt. If the glaciers melt, the permafrost will melt, and the carbon gases released from the northern sector of the planet will convert the entire planet into a greenhouse. The rise of 2 degrees centigrade, a rise of 2 degrees centigrade in temperature will mean that most of the coastal cities across the world will be drowned with the rising oceans. Nathaniel Rich then gives us a rich history of the water bodies and canals over which New York City has been built. And in this process, he gives us, and this is where the decolonizing history component, disaster studies component comes into play. He offers a cultural chronicle of the disaster's origins, and that lies in several centuries of human exploitative and extractive economies. In the days when Times Square was a red maple swamp and St. Mark's Place a hickory forest, populated by hawks and ravens, more than 40 brooks and streams covered the island of Manhattan. For all we knew, the pond was still there beneath the Empire State Building, percolating below the subway. All these waterways were buried when the city was built in the 18th and 19th centuries, but the water didn't disappear, it still pumped through the undersoil. Those of us who live in metropolises, I live in one, we know that waterways have been, and water bodies have been built over, and there is no outlet for the water when it rains. And the consequence of urban development is that the water stagnates, it floods, and produces the catastrophe. So Nathaniel Rich traces this back to the 19th century. Beneath the city that Greene built are waterways highly revered by the original settlers, the Lenape Indians, notes rich in the same passage. So he speaks about the fact that the Native Americans who lived in what is now Manhattan had more sense of how the city, how the place had to be treated. New York City embodies greed as itself as virtue because it believes collectively that greed is good. Like Habitat, which shows how the catastrophic flooding affects other non-human beings. So one important feature of these novels is that it's not just the humans who are affected by disaster. As people say about extinction, no extinction is in isolation. All extinctions are co-extinctions. That when one species dies, other species dependent upon it will die, and species where the prey species will flourish. So the disappearance of the megafauna or certain kinds of plants would mean catastrophe for other species as well. All species extinction is co-extinction. And here it shows how the catastrophic flooding affects other non-human lives in the language of gritty realism. So he describes numerous birds who have disappeared, seagulls, kingfishers, all of it now gone. Then, after the flooding happens, after much of New York City has gone underwater, for the new hydrosocial order, the subsequent disaster faced by humans has recolonized their habitats and their cognitive abilities. So what he does is to show that the birds have lost their homing sense. They do know how to fly back to their points, their nests, their roosting areas, because their cognitive abilities have been permanently damaged because of the flooding. Arcologies are built in, arcologies are architectural fantasies where the buildings are self-sustained. So there's massive 100-floor complexes built, which have their own water plants, which have their own air generating systems, and they're self-contained. So nobody needs to ever leave the arcology for their entire lives. This is one of the speculative fiction tropes which Valedictory uses in the Water Line. Arcologies are built for a segment of humanity to survive without ever having to leave the building and encounter the sun, the drought, or the dust of the world. But the arcology is a desperate measure at a time when most of the USA's water bodies have dried up, and whatever water remains has been corporatized with media employed to regulate supply and use. This arcology as an ecosystem has replaced an older one, and that's the key. And that older one was that of the tribes of the area. The Pima, the Pima descended from the Hokan, who used to farm this area back in the 1200s. Valedictory is pointing to historical vulnerabilities where development, symbolized in the arcologies, have replaced traditional Native American farming, just as the white man has replaced the Native American. So this is the continuity that I was talking about, that there has been a shall we say, a change, a series of events from the colonial period down to the present, and the tradition of exploitation, or what is now called extractive colonialism or extractive capitalism, has continued. The owner of the company has changed, the process has not. The race which does this has changed, but the overall consequences have remained unchanged. So this is the key that I want to pay some attention to in what I'm trying to do. Memories of disaster are erased, just like a flood waters erase buildings and people. A similar image of erasure may be seen in Coach's Hungry Tide, where an entire forest is drowned. If, as Adam Prexler has argued in his work on this kind of natural catastrophe models, the floodwaters and rising rivers alters and erases not just geographical detail but also human connections to place, and are signs of such events in the past. Water then levels the terrain, literally and metaphorically. After grim realism, the other component of what I want to talk about, other aesthetics I want to talk about under catastrophic realism, is quantificative realism. So for me, the catastrophic realism has two components. Grim realism, which I just finished talking about, and this, my second and final section, is about the quantificative realism of these hydro novels. Nathaniel Rich in Odds Against Tomorrow, even before he speaks of the flooding that drowns New York City and the United States, explores the economies of quote-unquote natural disaster. And this is something we need to keep in mind. Is there something really called a natural disaster? What is natural about nature or about natural disasters? Given the fact that human intervention, human cultural practices, industrialization have affected every aspect of the planet, including the tectonic plates through undersea drilling, the air, water of course, soil. What is natural about natural disasters? Is it possible any longer? And we have our own floods in India and landslides and things like that. Is it possible any longer to separate nature and culture when speaking about disasters? Is it feasible to think of flooding or earthquakes as solely the work of tectonic plates and earth? Or is there something else we need to say about it? So, Nathaniel Rich in Odds Against Tomorrow, even before he speaks about the flooding that floods New York City and much of the United States, explores the economies of natural disaster. And the costing that they are calculating, the loss that they are calculating, is in economic terms. And those of you who look at, say, something like insurance companies, you know that everything, risk is quantified now. In risk society, everything is quantified. The percentage of losses to be calculated, the percentage of benefits to be paid. So in Rick's novel, the entire purpose of this corporation is to insure against risk. So everything depends on calculating the percentage of risk. So what they do is they hire a person, a Sukkot, and you should think of these names. The company Future World is headed by a man called Alec Chernobyl. It sounds suspiciously close to Chernobyl. And the main accountant mathematician there is a man called Zuko, which rhymes in Chinese with Zuckerberg. They hire Zuko because he computes the odds, and this is the crucial part. He computes the odds of disaster for them to design insurance policies. And he seeks to calculate everything, including the odds of his own death. And this is how it does it. So, odds of death chart. Here is a chart. Odds of death chart. And it says, death by earthquake, 1 in 153,000. Death by air accident, 1 in 5,862. Death by accidental poisoning, 1 in 139. So, all of it is calculation. He says, at one point in the novel, in the United States, there are 900,000 elevators, each serving an average of 20,000 people per year. That means 18 billion passenger trips per year. These trips resulted in 27 deaths. So, the chance of dying in an elevator accident was therefore 1 in 10.44, repeating billion, about equivalent to the odds of dying from a dog bite. End quote. This quantificative method, which gives a supposedly realistic estimate of potential disaster, is employed by humans in the text for a different purpose in Becky Belloby's novel. And there, because water has to be purchased, when you buy from a water machine, it can give you only a certain quantity because it will cut off supply. But as it is supplying the water, the number ticks, and that's the price. So you have the flow and the price calculated. A bit like our petrol bunks. So you can think of water being sold through water bunks as well. So the numbers, as you can say, are unforgiving. So you have how many people took how many liters of water from which reservoir, which dam, and emergency purchases. So you have the buyers celebrate as the prices fall, and then the prices begin to rise. So the prices come down to $2.90 per liter, and it begins to rise. 5.5, 6.5, 7.05, 7.10, or at the stores as well. The climbing numbers reflect a system of regulation, and the climactic phrase order restored refers to the return of total control over the elements, concomitant with both commercialization and the denial of the same to the poor of the urban area. Quantificative realism in these texts subjects the landscape, its features, and processes to rational scientific assessment, almost as though it's possible to calculate the extent of damage. Quantificative realism is frightening because it captures in a narrative the extent of damage, control, and social engineering. To adapt Axel Adams's argument about minutes of extinction in Maya Montero's novel In the Palm of Darkness, in texts such as these, the catalogue that accompany and complement the narrative invoke a numerical sublime of thoughts, numbers too large to be contained by conventional storytelling technique. And that's the point I want to make, that quantificative realism might communicate the sense of control rationally, but what it communicates somehow seems to escape what they are trying to show. The quantum of disaster is not quantifiable, in other words. In the face of overwhelming human suffering, people speak about, when he describes people clinging to the rooftops or waiting rescue, things like that. At such points, technology and its instrumental rationality fail in the face of such elements. So in Ghost, the Hungry Tide 2, we see this happening. Despite their global positioning systems and the founds, PR cannot survive the storm but for the help of the native fakir. Ghost indicates that the metropolitan knowledge fails, and what saves the human is the indigenous planning. The mystic version of the post-colonial, beyond maps, devices, and quantification, is not a romanticization of the local. When the novel concludes, Ghosh has made a significant move. He integrates the rational post-colonial with the mystic one. The cyclone warning system, the database, and a commitment to greater local knowledge. As I've argued elsewhere, Fakir is the ghostly data that will be, in PR's words, the foundation of our project. In a sense then, Fakir is a spectre that returns to the body of data as incorporation. Both the uncanny and high country, unstable, uncertain, unreliable, and lacking strong foundations suddenly move towards a foundation. Grim and quantificatory realism together communicate a sense of the disaster of its prehistory, and this is my concluding set of remarks. The kind of realism that necessitates a description of visceral qualities of death, destruction, breakdown, ecological disaster merges with or combines with a penchant for instrumental rationality, a system by which you quantify this, you quantify the anticipation. So you say the percentage of possible loss, the percentage of people likely to be displaced. Grimy and quantificative realism together communicate a sense of the disaster and its prehistory, but also its limitations. Drawing on a common knowledge of such predictions of the future and incidents such as Katrina and other events in the past, novels convey possible scenarios and a familiar history of devastation. But this, the imperial legacy and the disaster, is not the only emphasis in the Hydra novel, which also looks to the future and constitutes what Cinematographer Mooran has described as its cataclysm. Thank you, and my apologies again for the terrible connection today. So it is better that I conclude now before I let it off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for this very interesting talk, Professor Nayyar, and I'm sure people have been thinking about the issues that you've raised. Your subject is a very pertinent and contemporary one. The Hydro novel expresses and shares those concerns which all of us must confront. I mean, you'll say today sitting in Hyderabad must be facing more of these, shall we say, hydrological or water scarcity problems than we do, but ultimately water must dry up here also, and we need to confront all kinds of situations. We have yet another speaker, Professor Ashish Saxena, and he is the head of our sociology department here in the Allied University of Allahabad. He is also a rather distinguished scholar, and he has certain ideas to share with us. Thank you once again, Professor Nayyar, very much, and we appreciate your thoughts about it. Now we have Professor Ashish Saxena, and he's one of those gentlemen whom you would generally see here and there all over the campus addressing distinguished academics. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair, Professor Sanjay Saxena, sir, esteemed Chair. On the other side, Professor S.K. Sharma, sir, a respected scholar in the field of English literature. On the right of mine is Vivek Kumar Dwivedi, and in the house we have Professor Jaya Kapoor, and the colleagues at the backstage, Dr. Mona. Yeah, so I think at the outset I would like to say that I am the odd man out, and when I say that, I mean it. I think when we try to speak about the topic, it's revisiting history, literature, religion, politics and propaganda. So neither I am the man of history, nor I am the man of literature, nor I am the man of political science. So in that way I am the odd man out. But still I will try to put my own indentures with regard to understanding of the theme. I think I can recall when these things were going to be structured. Dr. Vivek and Dr. Mrityunjay, they discussed certain thing and they said that, sir, can you also have some deliberation? I said that definitely it will be my pleasure to be part of this discourse. But again, I think somewhere we have to see that how we try to locate the whole understanding. I think I just confirmed from Professor S.K. Sharma that have anybody spoken on tribe. So sir said that नहीं, किसी ने बोला नहीं है, और दूसरी बात अगर किसी ने बोला भी है तो समाजशास्त्री तो नहीं बोला है. So that way my place is safe. So I just try to bring to your notice that as a student of sociology, we basically try to see that how things are being taken into consideration. I think basically we try to speak about certain important aspects, like the society which we try to speak in general. It's basically that we try to see society as heterogeneous, socially unequal in that sense, and we can basically try to see that the society is divided into three important aspects. At least the three domains in that sense which I can just think about as a student of sociology. The first of course is what we say is the gentry. Gentry which basically represents the urban. Then we have the peasantry which represents the rural. And then we have the tribal in that sense. So I think if you try to see the three things together, I think they can't go along. That of course is one important aspect. And if you try to put in the framework of hierarchy, basically you try to say that tribals are seen at the lower end. And I think seeing the sequence, although it's a valedictory, but the tribe or the relevant tribe is coming at the end. So I think in the whole discourse where the tribe is to be located, I think that is again important. So it's a matter of chance that tribe is going to be spoken at the end in that sense. When the gentry has spoken, peasantry has spoken, and now the tribal is going to speak. I'm not a tribe by nature, but the discourse on tribe definitely I'm going to say. Another important thing which I can just highlight, that the literature which we try to speak about. The literature sometimes we try to see as a student of sociology, like we are believing on the fieldwork traditions, and sometimes we try to say that whenever we try to speak about certain issues, it has to be empirically done. And that way I think literature for us is at a distance. But it does not mean that we don't have a linkage with the literature, because it is also a depiction of a society. But the important thing in that sense is that we try to see the literature basically in terms of a book view. Let us say, if we try to just project, we have the two broader views. One is the book view and another is the field view. And I think there is whole a school of thought, basically the ideological school of thought, which tries to base their understanding with regard to the textual interpretation. And that way I think somewhere we can try to relate ideology and literature to some extent together. And that way, if you try to see the understanding of the so-called, what am I going to say, the people from the field, I think we have to see that there is a shift from the book view to the field view. And today, I am not talking neither of the book view, nor I am talking about the field view. I am talking about the warm view. Warm view basically is कीड़े की नज़र से चीज़ों को देखा रहा है. So it's basically a warm view which I am trying to say, and that is what I am trying to speak about. It's the subaltern narrative, and talking about the subaltern basically in the framework of the tribal discourse. I think if I just try to go with certain works, basically you might have heard about B.S. Cohen, who said that an anthropologist among the historians. And here I would say that a sociologist among the literature. So it's basically placing myself into this whole discourse. And somewhere we try to see that why these issues are going to be important, especially when we try to speak about the politics, history, the literature in that sense, why tribe has to be located. I think I will just try to share two important aspects which I think is going to be the question of discourse. One of course is Mahashweta Devi's work on tribes. That is one important case study which somewhere I will try to reflect upon. And apart from that, my own understanding about the Gujar tribes of Jammu Kashmir, which were basically nomadic tribes. So I think within that framework I am trying to locate my whole understanding, but I will just try to give it structure, and it's basically that when we try to speak about the image of this melting pot thesis, which I think everybody was believing everything is going to be homogeneous, but that did not happen. Basically we try to see that there was a resurgence of the ethnic nationalism that started emerging, and especially we try to see that that flavor has come from the United States. So I think the whole question of homogenization, I think it was a big, what you can say, threat, and it was a big challenge in that sense, that how we can speak about the homogenization in a practice. And that way I think if you try to see as a student of sociology or in the framework of social science, we basically try to say that the whole notion of ethnicity and assimilation in that sense, they are the trickiest thing, because ethnicity has something to do with the history, and history again is not constant. I think here I will try to bring the contribution of D.P. Mukherjee, who had spoken at length about how we can locate the Indian history, and especially from a school of Lucknow school, he was basically trying to speak about the Marxological understanding about the Indian society. And within that framework, we try to see, we try to identify that the whole understanding of the history, which of course I think he was trying to just challenge also, that the whole history in that sense was seen as the evolutionary history, the static history in that sense, a periodic history. But why we did not speak about the dialectics within the history? Or how or why we should not speak about the question of contestation in the history? I think that is where we have to locate the whole understanding that history is not homogeneous, it is not a slow moving civilization in that sense, because civilization again is having lot many dialectics. So we have to actually locate the notion of dialectics with regard to the understanding of history. And within that framework, I think that was one important aspect, that we have to locate the whole discourse in a new way. And then I think the most important thing is the tribal world which we try to see. It's basically why it has come into picture, why it has come into the surface. So I think the whole subaltern school, I think all of you may be familiar with the contribution of Ranjit Guha, the subaltern series. I think now its 13th volume also has come. So all these volumes are basically speaking about that how subaltern had come into prominence, the whole subaltern studies came into prominence. And I think that debate is not very old. It came basically in 1970s. So we try to see that when and how the so-called local or the regional or sub-regional groups have come into the practice. So we got independence, we got the whole development in that sense, and we try to locate that the discourse on the so-called subaltern in that sense started emerging in 1970s. And I think parallelly, if you try to see, during or around that particular time, we also have the discourse on the women, especially the empowerment of women, started again in 1970s. So we try to see that the whole patriarchal value which has been predominantly present and how it has to be replaced or it has to be challenged in the 1970s. We had the environmental thoughts in that sense which also happened. So parallelly we try to see that there are multiple forces which work for, and we try to speak about the whole notion of the gender, the notion of the tribal, the environmental in that sense, and many other things. I think the previous speaker had just spoken about the justice with regard to the water, and here I am trying to speak about the justice with regard to the tribe. And this is where I think we have to actually see that how the cultural hegemony in that sense is being constituted and contested also, and it is basically seen in relation to the powerful colonial history. And I think we have to somewhere see or what do you say, relook into the colonial history which has been there. I think as a student of sociology we try to see that the history which has been projected or documented by the British colony, I think it has been seen, it is a checkered history which we have to relook into, like speaking about the village, speaking about the tribes, all these things in that sense have been done by their own way. Either it's the question of ethnography or it's the question of armchair understanding about these groups in that sense, because they were seen as the docile, the silent masses in that sense, which does not have a say. They are basically seen as an object, they should not be treated as a subject. All these things in that sense has happened in the whole social science discourse. And there I think we try to see that the tribe as a concept in that sense, it started emerging as a new form of culture, and we basically try to see that the tribe are to be seen in terms of an anthropological theory framework, which somewhere was been lost, because when we try to understand the tribe in the civilizational world, we try to say that they don't exist. But I think that is not true, because we try to see that the tribes are located within the so-called civilization, and like we have the various traditions, we have the little traditions, we have the great traditions. So definitely the urban or the civilizational understanding can be seen as one form of the great tradition. But parallelly we have also the little traditions, and there is a dialectics which is there between the two, the continuum between the two. So we can definitely locate the tribes within the whole project of civilization. And then I think we also try to see that the resilience which they have shown in terms of culture, linguistics, or in terms of religious differences, now I think that the time has come to show their resurgence with regard to the differences which they have shown, especially the emergence of the historicity of the new ethnic group. And here, the most important thing in that sense of course is that we try to see this whole understanding in terms of the identity politics. And this identity politics is basically related to certain amount of mobilization, basically with regard to the understanding of the indigenous people, how they are trying to mobilize themselves for a specific cause, and how the historically marginalized groups, they have to come into the forefront. And for that, I think the important catalyst definitely has been the process of democracy and globalization. I think we try to speak about the democracy, which is seen as an important project with regard to bringing about the equality and equity, but whether it is true in all senses, and then when we try to speak about the globalization, so how and where the tribes are going to be located with regard to that. I think we were just talking and discussing in that sense, and you might have seen that even the ICT, sometimes we are living in the urban world, and how the ICT has troubled us. And this is the nuances of the development. We basically try to see that we are handicapped with this ICT, person sitting at the distance, and that too in Hyderabad. It's a multi-class city, and there also the problem of network is there. So we can sometimes say that these challenges are with anybody and everybody. It's not that the tribes are at the periphery. I think he is also at periphery because he could not connect with us, that too in the modern world. So we have to see that nobody is backward that way. Everybody is backward in terms of technology or development. But how and where and who is going to be the driving force, that is going to be important. We can see that the whole reverberations of ethnic issues, why it has come into picture, because we try to say that the no history in that sense is seen as the final project. So history in that sense is basically seen as an unfinished agenda. And that way we try to see that when we try to speak about the postmodern discourse, I think they try to negate the whole understanding of the structured or the so-called established theories, the classics in that sense which have been there. I think postmodern basically tries to refute that. So I think when we are going on a very plain slate, we have to see that everybody is equal. So the postmodern, what they have done, they have basically tried to sabotage the whole classical and the elitist understanding about the social world, and now the postmodern gives the space to everybody. And that is where I think the whole problem comes, that this postmodern basically tries to give space to the categories which have been neglected in the history, and the history which is basically seen as a problematic discourse because it has been checkered through past. And we basically try to see that either it's the question of epistemology or methodology or for that sake ideology, in all the frameworks and also in terms of practicality, these things were challenged at the various platform. Then I think coming down quickly to the whole understanding of the history in terms of the ways the people try to create, I think there may be certain amount of politics of identities. It may be a charged identity also, I am not doubting that. But still I think there is an agenda of development, and within that framework they can locate where they are. So basically we can say that the history in that sense is to be seen in terms of reworking of the history, recreating the history in that sense, and it's the way in which we can have the new formations of the identity. And for that, I think the most important thing in that sense is the constructed understanding about our social world. It has to be minimized, and we have to see things in terms of the multiple hybrid, or we can say that fluid identities in that sense, which can be seen as fragmentary and nothing is constant or structured in that sense. And I think yesterday we had a talk by a transpacer. He also was saying the same thing, that we have to go beyond binaries, because binaries are not the solutions, because they try to fix our ideas. So we have to see things in between, and within that framework we have to speak about that how this in between has to be located, and for that I think that the hybrid understanding has to be also there. So definitely we try to speak about the dynamics of identity, especially when we try to speak about that, we are basically speaking about the sort of a symbolic order which has to be there. And I think here I will try to quote the Freudian philosopher Lacan, who basically was trying to speak about that how the signifier is going to play a crucial role. And this signifier in that sense is basically trying to tame the subject. And this subject which has been generated by the signifier, that signifier is silent. And here, I think when we try to say the tribe, we are trying to speak about the scheduled tribe, the scheduled caste in that sense. Now what has happened with that? Virtually they are trying to tame the understanding of the tribe, their own way of thinking, their own way of understanding the social world. I think that is all gone waste. And in the name of the schedule, they are basically trying to signify in terms of the signifier, and their whole identity in that sense is going to be lost. So it's basically the master signifier which is going to dilute the understanding of a specific subject into an object, and that is the whole problem. And then I think we try to speak about the whole notion of tribalism, which is basically seen as a new form of ideology. Tribalism basically is trying to have certain amount of identity politics with regard to assertion, and within that framework we try to speak about that how the ecological ethics they try to unfold with regard to the man-nature relationship, and which is historically established with the tribes. Now I think we are concerned about the environment. We are seen as the people who are protector of the environment. But from history, I think they are the people who are celebrating, practicing, living and working with the nature in that sense. But now, as an urban, as a gentry, we are trying to safeguard the environment, and the people who are living with that, they are to be taught that how they have to be tamed, how they have to behave, how they have to dwell, and that is where I think the whole problem lies. The state trying to act as a player, and they try to guide and subjugate the understanding of the tribe. So we can basically say that the whole discourse which has to be seen is to be seen in terms of the new understanding about the tribes, and it is to be seen how things are shifting from quality to quantity. The quality has gone, it's the quantity which is coming up. The numbering census, I think, is the best example. Census is basically enumerating that what is your population, and then according to that you are going to get certain benefits. So it's a number game. It's not the quality of a specific tribe. So the tribe in that sense has become silent, the quality has become silent, it's the number which works. Who is going to rule, who is going to dictate? I think we have lot many examples in the different parts of the state. Either we try to speak about the Minas of Rajasthan, and there are many other tribes which are being put at the margin. So we have to see that the whole discourse has to be seen vis-a-vis the others who are in the same platform, and that way I think we try to see that there is a tussle within the tribe itself, which of course I think is been silent when we try to speak about the scheduled tribe in general. So I think we have to raise and we have to see all these discourses which has to come, and basically we try to see that the state, what they have done, they are basically trying to put the tribes as the refugees in their own homeland. And here lies the whole problem, because the traditional habitat of the tribes, they are putting into a vulnerable situation, they are marginalized in their own area, and we have number of ways in which we try to see that how tribes can be seen as the category which can have their own say. I think I would appreciate the contribution of Ramakrishna Mukherjee, who was basically trying to speak about the traditional ecological knowledge. Traditional ecological knowledge, that is TEK, capital T, capital E, capital K. And this traditional ecological knowledge is basically speaking about the socio-ecological imprints of the tribes, and how the tribes were seen as the preservers of the sacred space, the sacred groves, the sacred landscapes, and which in a more sociological or social anthropological term, we call them as the totems of the tribes. So they are basically seen as the conservers of the different items, and that way I think the totem protectors, because totem is something which is to be preserved by fear, by force, and that is where we try to see that the sacred species, sacred groves, sacred landscapes are being protected by the traditional society. The traditional wisdom which we try to see is also trying to involve certain amount of biodiversity, and they are the protectors of the biodiversity also. And this biodiversity is to be seen in terms of that how the uncertainties with regard to the environmental issues have taken place, and we try to build up the new argument that the Indian enlightenment has to be seen with regard to the indigenous resource of these tribes, and we try to see that can we have certain knowledge about the indigeneity which is to come from the tribes, and this is the new discourse which is going to emerge. I think all of us know that the President of India definitely the lady belonging to a specific category in that sense, and that is the replica in which we try to say that the tribes are being celebrated. So virtually we try to see that how things are moving in that sense. Maybe it is a showcase, or sometimes it is the real empowerment that to a lady. Within tribe also we have the marginalization, so a lady tribal in that sense is coming to the surface and trying to have the highest authority with regard to the Indian setup. So we have to see these nuances which are happening and how the tribes in that sense are going to be represented. Is it a matter of representation, or it's a matter of empowerment and what I can say, representation in the true sense? And somewhere we try to say that on the one hand we have the tribal rationality, and on the other we have the elitist rationality, now which is going to be weighted high. And I think if we go with the logic of practice, I think I will try to locate that the tribal rationality is going to be superior rather than the elitist rationalism. because the tribal rationality is based on the indigenous wisdom, which has the power to control and to manage the environment better than the elitist rationalism. It's the question of water crisis which we are speaking about. They don't require the bottles, packed bottles. They don't require, they have fresh streams, they have fresh waters in that sense. They are not bothered about these petty things. But what we are doing in that sense is, we are encroaching into their area, and then we are trying to control the resource management, and that way we are trying to empower their resources and putting them at the backstage. I think here I will try to quote Virginis Khaka, who basically is trying to speak about two important points, that the tribal identity as the indigenous in a matter of pride. We try to say that tribes are to be seen in terms of a pride and also associated with the rights and privileges. That is one aspect in that sense. And then other is basically that how the government in that sense is trying to treat that. I think if you try to read the EPW, wonderful article is by Virginis Khaka on trying to locate the term tribe with Adivasis, Mulnivasis, or with the Janmanas. Many other terms, parallel terms are there. All these terms are replaced by a single term, that is tribe, which is considered to be universal. And within that framework, many sub-identities of the tribes in terms of Adivasis, Janmanas and other things are going to be sidelined. So I think in the whole project of homogenization, these are the issues which are basically coming up. And so I think because I'm in-house, you can stop me anywhere, because I know that the session is already late. I can come anytime, I can speak again, so not an issue. So I will just say a few words and then I will just try to sum up my things, because we have two tough taskmasters over here and they sometimes put me into trouble. So I think quickly I will just try to see two things which I will try to focus upon. It's a long paper, so I'm not going to delve all these things as such. Like one thing in that sense which I just try to focus, that Indian sociologist G.S. Bhure was basically speaking about the tribe as the backward Hindus. Now, putting tribe as the backward Hindus is a project whereby the tribes are to be endorsed into the specific framework of Hinduism. But I will just try to see or share with you that tribe does not have a specific religion. I think we all know that tribe by themselves don't have any religion. They basically have the element of totem, and through that they try to celebrate their unity in that sense. But in the name of the development, what we are trying to make out is that, okay, X tribe is belonging to the Hindu category, Y tribe is belonging to the Muslim category. Like the Gujars which I am trying to speak about, they belong to the Sunni sect, Muslim. Similarly, the tribes in Ladakh, they are basically coming into the Muslim sect as such. So basically we try to see that it's we who are basically trying to encroach and trying to tame them in the name of religion, in the name of caste. We have this whole phenomenon of tribe caste continuum. I think there is a full work by Surjit Sinha, who was speaking about the tribe caste continuum in terms of Rajputization of tribe. So tribes are to be put in the framework of Rajputs. So I think we are trying to put them into the hierarchy. The tribes which were considered to be homogeneous in many senses, and those tribes are to be segmented. That is our wisdom, that is the elitist rationalism which we are trying to project. And then I think Gyanin Pandey was basically speaking about the subaltern citizens in terms of that how fairly we can try to see the conditionality of the situations of the lower caste, the classes, and also the immigrants and the minorities, the women in a specific way. And that is basically we try to see that in the name of the status of the citizens, we are trying to putting them into the mainstream. But where they are located, it's a bigger question. And we have to see that the subaltern is basically trying to put themselves into the framework of critical historiography, and within that framework I think they are at the losing end. So what is happening in that sense is that in the framework of nation state, if you try to see, you try to see that ontologically or politically or otherwise, in the name of citizenship, where they are located, all of us may agree that they are not rated high. And then I think apart from that, we also can locate them in the issue of minority and the majority. So within that framework also, I think we have to see that the whole discourse changes, because many times we try to put them into minorities, but I see like the Northeast, why they should be in minority, I don't understand. So I think we have to see that why sometimes we are trying to put them in the category of minority where they can be seen as majority, or the vice versa. Like in Jammu Kashmir, we can have certain specific religious groups which are put as the minority, although they are in majority. So I think we have to see that how this name game, the number game in that sense plays, and they try to label certain categories as the majority or the minority. So again, that is another important aspect. And then I think the whole question of intra-group and intergroup exclusion, which is equally happening. And quickly I will just try to take upon the justice issue, which has been taken upon by Amrita Sen. I think the famous work, Idea of Justice, it's a voluminous book. So you just try to see that how he's trying to see the whole understanding about the justice. He tried to speak about three aspects. One is the exclusionary neglect, which is basically seen as that how we try to exclude the voices of the people. That is one category. Then we have exclusionary incoherence, which is basically seen as inconsistencies with regard to the exercise of the closing of the groups. And the third is the procedural parochialism, which is seen as how we are trying to devise or eliminate partially in terms of the procedures. So these are the three frameworks in which we have to see that how the justice for these categories are to be seen. And within that framework, we try to locate that there is always a tussle on the issue of marginals, either it's the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and for that sake any other category, and they are basically put in the category of marginalization, and we try to speak about that how they are trying to show their resistance, and the resistance is basically coming in the form of the gheraos or the blockades or the Andolan, I think Chikko Andolan, or we try to speak about the Narmada Bachao Andolan. All these issues have been global and regional and national, and they try to speak about that they have their own voices. And then I think coming down to the last aspect, Gayatri Spivak spoken about can subaltern speak, and for that the answer is given by the wonderful work by Sanatan Bhaval, sorry. So he was basically, I have reviewed this work, it's the Subaltern Speaks, that is the title, the truth and ethics in the Mahashweta Devi's work, and it's a fiction on the tribes. Now in this, I think if you try to speak about, it has been projected that the so-called tribes in that sense were powerful enough in terms of assertion, in terms of determination about their narratives. And we try to see that how the wounds of history are being projected through the various narratives which they try to depict. Especially I think some of the work right over the forest, or maybe the work related to the Draupadi and the aspect of Dholu and the Shanichari. All these characters in that sense are basically replicating that how the tribal world in that sense have their own fascinating understanding about the social reality, and that way we try to see that the different languages are there and subalterns speaks in the different languages. So I think they are not muted, they are having the voice, and that is where we have to correct ourselves, that they can have the language of songs, they can have the language of culture, they can have the language of dreams, they can have the language of emotions, but which are not seen in terms of literature. So literature in that sense is putting at the backstage, and that was my whole worry, that how and where we have to document all these things. And that way, I think we try to simply say that the elitist rationality in that sense has to be put at the backstage in order to give the due justice to the whole community. And then I think quickly I will just try to speak about the Gujar tribes of Jammu Kashmir. Basically they were the nomadic tribes. All of us know that they were the transhumans practicing across the Kashmir valley and to the Jammu. And I was trying to locate their civilization process. And the civilization has happened because of the intervention of the state. The issue of terrorism, or maybe the forest lands were being restricted in terms of movement or many other things. And for your information, these Gujars at certain period of time in history they have been the rulers of the Kashmir. Now you can just see the contrast. The rulers of Kashmir are now the nomadic tribes. And another important aspect which I will just try to float, that they got the reservation or the nomenclature of the scheduled tribes in 1991. You can just see the interesting story, that how and when, who is getting what is going to be decided by the state. I was part of one state tribal commission committee which was basically trying to put a specific category as tribe, and that was the Pahadi community. So the Pahadi community, which is basically in the Pir Panjal areas and certain pockets of the upper ridges of Rajouri, Poonch and other areas. Now within that, we as a social scientists were asked that can they be claimed into the category of scheduled tribes? Now our answer was very straight, no. Why? Because the Pahadi community were getting or were demanding for the reservation of the scheduled tribes because of their location, that they live in the hilly area and that's why they should be given the tribal status, which the Gujars were opposing, because if they also come into the picture, so the case will be shrinked in that sense. So what happened in that sense is that they tried to protest against the whole issue, and I have got some threatening, what do you say, phone calls and other things. Sir, अगर उनको मिलता है तो ये तो बहुत जाती होगी हमारे साथ. All these funny things happened, and there was one prominent leader, Gujar leader, Javed Rahi, who was a good journalist also. So he was in touch. He was a good friend of mine, but because of that particular issue, we were in trouble and we were not talking also. I said, okay, I know what justice I have to give, so don't worry, don't try to intervene into my understanding. But anyway, what I'm just trying to put the things short, that I just try to say that, see, technically speaking, these tribes should not be given, or these communities should not be given the status of tribe. The reason being that they don't have, they have the specific language and region, but apart from that, they have the heterogeneous category, they have the caste formation, they have their own religion, they have their own food habits, which is not uniform in that sense as such. So all these things have been there. They have the class phenomenon. So in all that aspects, they cannot be equated with tribe. But for your information and consumption, the state says that we have made up our mind to put them into the category of scheduled tribes. Now, this is the aspect which the academia faces in that sense, that sometimes we try to put or correct certain histories, but again how the histories are being challenged by the state, by the rule in that sense, that is another interesting thing. So I think with these things, I will just stop it here, and I think the session is already delayed, and since I'm in-house, so I should not disturb further. Thank you.
I invite Professor Sanjay Saxena to conclude the session.
It's been such a privilege sitting here and listening to two very learned lectures, one by Professor Nair and the other one by Ashish Saxena. The subject of this seminar has been the most relevant. Histories would be revisited through literature, and issues like politics, religion and propaganda will be discussed. Well, all of us receive messages on our WhatsApp and the computer, through the internet. These are issues which we keep grappling with every now and then with different kinds of perspectives. I had also been writing something for this seminar, and I had been exploring material. I had read about history from the home, but I had never thought about the worms side. That people who are the dregs of the society, that who are worms and insects in our system, also think and feel that they also matter, and when they do not matter, they probably start creating violence or attacking others. And I also read during the course of my explorations, Eric Hobsbawm telling us that the rich have forgotten to be afraid of the poor. So we were talking about the hydro novel, etc. And then people being not willing to share scarce resources, ubiquities like air and water. Now, air is free, but water is not free. And there is this conversation about the water below the earth being polluted. These are new dimensions in human history which need to be taken up. I mean, eco-criticism, that's it, Sarojit here. So he talks about all that. So imagine taking out water from a well and the water destroying us, killing us, or people falling ill. So there are numerous dimensions, disaster, ecological disasters taking place. Professor Pramod Nair discussing all that and in his lecture. These are very serious issues, and one of the problem dates which have come up in 2065. So another 40 years or so from now, 42 years, perhaps many of these things will become true, and many of us are still students, so they may live to see perhaps these things. We may not be alive. But these are some observations, some thoughts which came to my mind, and allow me to be grateful to all of you for having made this evening, the last 2 days, very wonderful. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Professor Sanjay Saxena, for chairing this session. I now invite Professor S.K. Sharma to share his views. Thank you. Professor Sharma, thank you.
Once the chair has already given the concluding remarks, nothing remains for me to say. But still, since the organizers want me to say something, I have to say something. And this saying something is using the language. So the politics of language. The politics of religion also takes place through a certain kind of language. And literature, of course, is language. What has been the role of language? That is one issue that somehow escaped the attention of the speakers in these 2 days. Professor Ashish Saxena spoke a great deal about how to homogenize society. He basically drew on Western paradigms and he tried to study the Indian society. How the tribal issues have been sidelined, marginalized, or come into the force, and how the tribes are being looked from a particular perspective. When I say a particular perspective, this also includes language. How many of us know as to how many languages do these tribal people speak? When we do not know their language, how do we interact with them? As a matter of fact, when India became free, there was a white priest, Christian priest, warrior Alvin. He was located in Jabalpur, and Nehruji asked him as to what should be the policy regarding the various tribes of India. It was, as a matter of fact, warrior Alvin's policy that decided the future of the tribes in India. As a matter of fact, this divide between the urban people and the tribes perhaps was immaterial. But with the arrival of the British on the scene, this became certainly an important issue. After all, these were the people who were responsible for the annihilation of several tribes in the United States. The issue of propaganda is related to that. I generally, when I used to teach American literature, I generally used to ask one question as to what is the image of an American that comes to your mind. And the image of an American that comes to a mind, young mind in India happens to be the image of a white European, a Christian European, at the most a black African. Are they really Americans? What could be a more propagandist view of America than this? Even the courses that we are teaching, are they not simply the extensions of the European civilization? Particularly the course in American history, or particularly in the course of American literature. Where is the voice of the natives? The politics of language and propaganda. Not even one author finds a mention, neither a poet, nor a dramatist, nor a... So do we mean to say that these tribal people, they do not have any literature? Do we mean to say they do not have any poetry, any novel, any prose? The best piece of literature, particularly of environmental literature, is considered to be the Seattle Chief's speech. The people even do not know who the Seattle Chief was. Various versions of that speech are available. Could it be prescribed that? And you see, the emotional appeal and the conflict of ideas. He was talking of tribal beliefs and the urban beliefs. After these 13 colonies, they had revolted against England and they had won the war. George Washington was elected the leader, and he, in a civilized way, civilized within quotes, he wrote a letter to the tribal chief saying, I want to buy this piece of land. What price will you ask? And the speech is considered to be a reply to that offer of George Washington, where he says that you have made a very generous offer of buying a piece of land. Why a generous piece of land? Otherwise they could have come with a gun, as they did in the past, seeking permission. I have also lived in Nainital, so I know how Nainital was captured by a Britisher. So they could have come. So what are you going to do with this piece of land? The tribal chief says, you are going to raid that piece because you are going to dig into the entrails of that land. That is equivalent to rape and rapine. It is in your culture that you rape and rapine your own mother. We in our culture do not do that. What are you going to do to the trees? You are going to cut them down. It must be in your culture that you kill your own brother. It's not a part of my culture. And the permission is not granted, still the piece of land is taken over and railroads have been laid. This is what they call development. When you talk of development and when you talk of words, just see the language. You say we are living in the modern times, we are living in the developed times. Naturally you are saying that the people in the past, they were uncultured, they were undeveloped. Is that really a fact? Is that not a propaganda? What is your sense of time? Have you ever tried to understand that? Or is it simply a linear progression of time in which when you are moving forward, you are moving towards the development? As a matter of fact, you might be ruining your past and your present. regarding tribals, concept of nationhood. If it has done greatest harm to anybody, any human group, these people happen to be the tribes, particularly the nomads. You remember a poem by Matthew Arnold, the scholar gypsy? This scholar gypsy basically happens to be a descendant from a person from Rajasthan. These people, these Romans, from roaming from Iran to Turkey to the East Europe, and if you see the language, several words in Rajasthani and several words in the Roma language in 21st century. Roma settled in Poland, Roma settled in even in France, in Germany. If you conduct a study of their language, several commonalities are there. But with the passage of time, when you are not able to cross the boundaries of one nation, the geographical boundaries that have been created, artificial boundaries that have been created because of the nationhood, lot of harm has been done. Now, who is responsible for this? The people of the so-called civilized world? A wonderful novel by Arun Joshi, A Strange Case of Billy Viswas, has been prescribed for a study. So, you are describing Billy as a strange case. Why? Because he is exploring the world of wisdom. After all, Billy is able to cure a person of migraine for which the modern medicine has got no cure. From where is that wisdom coming? That wisdom is coming from the tribal world. How will that person, just imagine, how must he have interacted with Belizeia or with the tribal world if the language was not common? And after all, he too was a man of anthropology. Anthropology happens to be a specialization of sociology. So my friend, Professor Ashish Saxena, a sociologist, while he is talking about all these issues, I think he and the people of his clan, they should also talk about the language these tribal people use. And as a matter of fact, in one of my papers I have written that one of the major tasks before the literature departments in this country happens to be to document the language of the area. After all, in every district headquarters, at least one PG college is there. Can't that PG college or the language departments of that particular country, a particular district, even document the language of that particular place? If we know the language, perhaps we'll be trying to understand the religion. We use the word totem, right? The entire debate about these tribals being Hindus or being converted to Christianity or to Muslim religion, that is based on the interpretation of the word totem. If they are singing songs about Ram, is it a totem? If they are worshipping a peepal tree, is it a totem? If they are worshipping a river, is it a totem? If they are believing that a particular kind of hill starts shining when my king is born, is it a totem? So what kind of vocabulary are we using when we describe all these people? And you start moving from the peripheries and you come to the center. Another approach could be one, you start moving from the center and you are spreading toward the... So fortunately or unfortunately, when the state is there, the center becomes powerful and you try to ignore the periphery. But at any point of time, the periphery and the center, they will always exist. There is no way out. I think that is sufficient for me at this point of time. I was just an intruder. I was not supposed to be speaking here, but because Dr. Vivek and Dr. Mona insisted, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor S.K. Sharma, for raising some very valid points regarding tribes and tribal culture, not only in India but the world over. And thank you, Professor Ashish Saxena, for drawing parallel to very different but very interesting topics of this valedictory session. And I quote him, he said about hydro-novel justice to water and about his paper on tribal India, justice to tribe. And thank you very much for that. Now I request Dr. Mrityunjay, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Modern European Languages, University of Allahabad, to present Professor Ashish Saxena with the memento. Dr. Mrityunjay, Sakshi will be accompanying him. Thank you very much. I now invite the convener, Dr. Vivek Dwivedi, to propose the vote of thanks.
So finally it has ended. Not for this session, but the whole seminar. Anyway, now after it has ended, it was long awaited, but when something ends, sometimes it disheartens you. This seminar has created a vacuum in our hearts after it is ended. Now, honestly, now I feel unemployed. I don't have anything to do. And there's a catch. After 2 days, you will have holidays of 5 or 6 days. So everybody has to deal with that unemployment. So find something to do. Anyway, we were so invested in this seminar that now we feel drained out, positively of course. Now, I don't think anybody wants to hear me or want me to speak any further. I would just like to thank the speakers who spoke today. Professor Pramod Kinaya, who spoke online. There were some technical glitches, but they were very much expected. Anyway, Professor Ashish Saxena, who came on a very short notice, thank you very much for coming and for giving us quality talk. Thank you very much, sir. Now I would like to thank the members of the committee. It's a long list, but you will have to bear it because it will be injustice to them and even it will be unethical on my part if I do not name them. I would like to name first the students in the management committee: Navneet, Samiksha, Apurvi, Anshu, Damini, Vaishali, Sakshi, Mohit Singh. Then in registration committee, Ajit Parihar, Shalini, Muskan, Divyanshi, Mirisha, all these people have done commendable work. Program committee, Pranjali, Smriti Pandey, Jyotika Jaiswal, Sneha, Ayman, Marzia, Nivedita, Mukul, Soumya, Srinivas. And in venue preparation, we had Akhilesh Singh, Ashish Yadav, Anup, Satya. In the food management committee, we had Shubhan Tripathi, Abhijit Balkaran, Abhinav Sharma. Media committee, Shubhi, Neha, Sneha, Adarsh. Transportation was looked after by Krishna and Prashant Yadav. Logistics, Rajneesh Singh, Vatsan, Mohit, Aniket and Abhinav. Live streaming, Harsh Pandey. And now I'm very thankful and very grateful to all of you. Now I will also like to name the faculty members who have done incredible work. Dr. Rajesh Verma, Dr. Pratima Chaitanya, Dr. Umesh Chandra, Dr. Prajapati, Satish Prajapati, Dr. Sada Siddiqui, Dr. Jaswinder Singh, Dr. Pradeep Kumar, Dr. Amrish Khare, Dr. Amarnath, Dr. Shiban, Dr. Aloysius Sebastian, Dr. Prashant Kumar Pandey, Dr. Hariom Singh, Dr. Raju Pargi, Dr. Yuraj Herode, Dr. Pramod Kumar Gond, Dr. Mrityunjay Rao Parmar, Dr. Manoj Kumar, Dr. Devashish Pati, Dr. Kumar Parag, Dr. Kanchan Yadav, Dr. Charu Vaid, Dr. Kanchan Chakraborty, Dr. Nakul Kanda. I must have missed many names. Please bear with me and please forgive me for that. I also want to tell you, please fill up a feedback form which will be issuing maybe after one or 2 days. It was great having all of you over here with this Spanish expression. I will say goodbye, hasta la vista. Goodbye, thank you very much.
With this, we come to the end of the valedictory session. There will be a short tea break. Kindly join us back for a cultural program. Thank you so much.
यहाँ से बंद करता हूँ
लाइव वाला चलने देते कि 15 मिनट का ब्रेक है
उसका वो नहीं होगा
तो कल्चर का नहीं होगा